Trump buck slaps the Ayatollah. So missiles fired last night at U.S. bases. No U.S. casualties. And the president has a message to Iran that we'll get into today. Also, a horrific jet crash as a plane was leaving Tehran. 176 dead. We'll have updates for you on that. The Department of Justice has gone for a longer sentence for General Flynn. And CNN has settled its lawsuit with Covington Catholic student Nick Sandmann. That's coming up.
As long as I'm president of the United States, Iran will never be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. Good morning. I'm pleased to inform you the American people should be extremely grateful and happy. No Americans were harmed in last night's attack by the Iranian regime. We suffered no casualties. All of our soldiers are safe, and only minimal damage was sustained at our military bases. Our great American forces are prepared for anything. Iran appears to be standing down, which is a good thing for all parties concerned and a very good thing for the world. No American or Iraqi lives were lost because of the precautions taken, the dispersal of forces, and an early warning system that worked very well.
Welcome to the Buck Sexton Show. It was a bit harrowing last night as we had reports coming in of Iranian missile strikes on U.S. bases in Iraq. There were many who were immediately thinking about the possibility that we were going to suffer perhaps a large number of U.S. casualties, that perhaps this was going to be just the start of a much larger escalation, perhaps attendant terror attacks, follow-on strikes, that shutting down of the Strait of Hormuz that everyone's been so concerned about, and that we would be plunged headlong into war. Right? That's something that everyone has at least had on their minds. But there's a bit of hysteria surrounding this that I want to dispel today. And the president this morning gave what should be viewed by anyone who's trying to see this honestly as a perfect response under the circumstances to what has gone on here. You have all these people who are so invested in Trump as an ignoramus, doesn't know anything, doesn't understand anything, and yet he keeps making decisions that they tell us are going to be disastrous. They warn us, oh, it will be disastrous if he does this thing. And then once he does it, there are all these people who are completely freaked out about what this will mean. All of the terrible calamities that will befall us because of Trump, the evil, bad man, the orange man who is bad. And then it turns out the warnings they were giving us were overheated. Then it becomes clear that what they've been saying to us is just not accurate. They're predictions of doom, which are meant to have an effect on the people who hear them. The effect is to make them believe that there is an even greater instability, that Trump is this reckless, clownish, dangerous buffoon in the Oval Office. And they keep reinforcing this belief with predictions, but the predictions are wrong. They're not true. Now, they can always extend the timeline, and that's what they'll do today. Oh, well, the Iranians will get us back at a time and place of their choosing. Okay. And if it's this president in office, I think we're all quite clear on the fact that Trump will respond in a way that will change their calculations if and when they decide to do more than this. I have to tell you, the more troubling aspect of last night, I mean, the first and most important thing was the possibility of the United States armed forces losing men and women in uniform because in this strike. The implications of that, and first just the loss of our people, then the implications for what that response would lead to. You had the Drudge Report saying on its front page, its big banner, it's war. No, this is not actually war. This is A similar back and forth that we've been having with Iran actually for decades. I mean, let's not forget, there was the tanker war with Iran. Let's not forget that we accidentally shot an Iranian airliner out of the sky at one point during hostile circumstances with Iran. There have been plenty of times where there has been elevated tension between our country and their country because the Iranian regime is an evil, despotic theocracy that is the only, find me another country other than North Korea that is constantly talking about the need at the highest level, from the top of the government apparatus, the need to destroy an entire other country. And the implication is certainly, if not openly stated, to kill all of its inhabitants. The Iranian mullahs say that they want death to America, they want death to Israel, they want to destroy Israel, kick them into the sea, drown them in a sea of fire, all of this stuff. Normal governments, reasonable people don't say these things, don't do these things. But we have gone through a period here where we've had successive administrations, Bush and Obama, who were unwilling to do what was necessary against the Iranian regime. I mean, I said it yesterday on Outnumbered and also here on this show. Trump doesn't like one-way wars. The people, the so-called experts and the foreign policy intelligentsia out there, all these different journalists who are doing live streams from Qasem Soleimani's hometown of his funeral, they're live streaming this? Why do we particularly have to see this at all? That's a very clear editorial decision that is being made. It's hard not to think that there are some journalists who are, if not personally saddened by this Qasem Soleimani strike, view it as first and foremost an opportunity to bash this administration. Trump has done something that everyone who hates him claims proved just how reckless and dangerous and stupid he is. And now we see the immediate consequences of it, which they were telling us, they were projecting was going to be disastrous and terrible. And I saw one former Obama official last night, Ben Rhodes and his little echo chamber of idiots. Oh, this didn't have to happen. This is Trump's fault. Okay. They fired a bunch of missiles at bases. I got news for you. I've been in Iraq a couple times. Missiles get fired and different indirect fire, IDF, comes into these Iraqi bases, has been for years. I'm not saying it's not a hostile act and that it should not be taken incredibly seriously and that we shouldn't just let the Iranians do this. It's a different thing for them to fire these missiles from their own territory. But they acted to show that they can act. But this is, if you're looking at it from what it means from their perspective now and how we are staring at each other across this battlefield, so to speak. They're saying, okay, well, we're going to do something. We're going to show you we could do more. But we're not going to cross a red line here. We're not going to do something that must be met with a crushing and overwhelming American response. Right? They're not going to do that. Okay. Well, why is that the case? After all these little different provocations, bringing down our drone, grabbing our sailors under the Obama administration, attacking tankers in the Strait of Hormuz, or sabotaging them. You see all these things here, and then you add into this, of course, their efforts in Iraq to undermine us, including the killing of U.S. soldiers at different points during hostilities there, but also this storming of the embassy moment. Trump just drew a line in the sand. And this is what many of us have been saying all along here. When Trump draws a line in the sand, our enemies take it seriously. And by killing Qasem Soleimani, who was considered by so many a guy you can't touch, he was invincible. He was invincible because we decided, or the people who had been making decisions for a long time, had come to think that it was just too much of a provocation with Iran. It's too much of an Iranian provocation if their feeling is that they could do something truly egregious, that they could go after our people and kill a lot of our people in response to killing Qasem Soleimani, and then we would say to them, well, hold on a sec. let's not get crazy. Let's de-escalate this in some way. Right? And then we would say that this is a circumstance that we have to find a way to, we'll take the L, so to speak. We'll take the loss on this one. I mean, this is one of the strongest decisions. And I come here, sitting down here, what would I have to say if the Iranians had launched some kind of a strike and, God forbid, had, killed scores of American servicemen somewhere, had blown up a couple of oil tankers, we had a geological or an ecological, rather, not geological, ecological catastrophe in the Strait of Hormuz. You had a mass casualty incident with U.S. soldiers. You had terrorist proxies engaging in mass casualty attacks against us and our interests and our allies around the world, all in the say-so of Iran. I'd have to say, okay, maybe it is going to be war now because of Qasem Soleimani, but the Iranians haven't done that. Why haven't they done that? Now, you can always say they'll escalate at some point in the future, but then you never get to make any worthwhile decisions because you're not looking at what they're really doing in response to U.S. action. Trump has showed them he's the guy who's willing to do what the two presidents before him were not, to take riskier, more dramatic action as commander-in-chief against the Iranian regime. And he's the one that we think the Iranians are going to try to test now? I don't think so. There are reasons, by the way, that have gotten overlooked for why the Bush administration, I keep bringing up the Bush administration, obviously they weren't gun-shy, so to speak, Afghanistan, Iraq, but where was this sense of invincibility from the Bush administration coming from? Well, in the second part of Bush's term, really, or the end of the first term and into the second term, Iraq was so destabilized, and it was in the midst of what was effectively a Shia-Sunni ethnic cleansing, and there was such concern over the civil war growing much larger and more intense that they just didn't think they had the bandwidth. They didn't think they could handle truly going after Iranian interests in Iraq. There was always this sense of, okay, well, we don't want to kick the hornet's nest too much there. We got to worry too much about Al-Qaeda in Iraq, AQI. We have to worry about dealing with the surge and the different indigenous forces that were assisting U.S. military in fighting against Al-Qaeda in Iraq. All of that, right? That was, and so they didn't go after Iranian interests in Iraq because they felt like they couldn't take that on. And then the Obama administration came along, and they just sort of took that momentum of, all right, we're not going to touch the Iranians. They'll come back and say, oh, okay, well, we are trying to buy off the Iranians. We're going to give them money. We're going to do whatever we have to do to make the Iranians happy. So with that in play, the Obama administration got this joint comprehensive plan of action, the JCPOA, signed, which was far too favorable for Iran because the fundamental problem of the Obama foreign policy approach, if we're going to start to look at something that is that is the Trump doctrine, right, and everyone's going to be talking about this now, they're going to come up with their versions of it, but I haven't actually, there isn't really much of a distillation of the Trump doctrine other than who are our friends, who are our enemies, how do we treat them differently? Why does it matter to be one or the other? And do we use the leverage and the power and the force that we have when necessary for our own interests? The Obama administration approach, and people like John Kerry, a deeply unimpressive intellect, by the way. I mean, John Kerry's not a particularly bright guy. He's just a guy who's maneuvered however he has to build some political career based on, John Kerry has said something really intelligent when? Just give me one time when you're like, wow, John Kerry really nailed that issue. He really understands it. So he and the other members of the Obama team that were negotiating this with Iran, they approached the nuclear agreement from the perspective of the Iranians and America are really, similar in terms of their, the Iranian regime in America, similar in terms of the merit of these countries, the worth of these countries. We don't want to anger them too much because they can make things really ugly for us. Trump comes in and says, okay, yeah, they can make things ugly for us. We can make things disappear for them. That's a very different thing. And this is why you keep hearing people who say oh no, but the Iranians will get us in the future, and they have a very long memory. And look at Salman Rushdie, the Satanic Verses. They still have a bounty on a novelist's head, my friends, from the top of the Iranian regime. This is not a normal country. This is not a normal government. We're not just bullying some country. We're not threatening to invade Finland tomorrow. They should be treated differently. They should be ostracized. Additional sanctions were announced this morning. That's the right way to go. But here's the fundamental takeaway. So far, Trump's gamble was correct. He's right, because he is elevating the perception of what it is that our enemies have to be worried about when it comes to our response, instead of us always worrying about their response. He has put the onus now on them. Oh, they want to play rough? We can play rougher. Now, people say, oh, that's chest thumping, that's tough guy talk, people don't understand anymore. No. The chest thumping is happening with all the people who claim Trump is an idiot, he's leading us right into war. No, he's not leading us right into war. The Iranians could declare war on us tomorrow. I mean, we're always having to, at some level, react to the insanity of the mullahs. But we don't think that's going to happen. Why? Don't forget this. If Iran could raise Tel Aviv to the ground tomorrow and get away with it, they would. If Iran could engage in a mass casualty attack on U.S. soil against us and get away with it, the mullahs would. The reason they don't do that is not because they're so rational and reasonable and decent and fair. It's because they know that we hold the power to annihilate them in response. Trump has reminded the mullahs to take that power seriously now. All right, let's just get into some of the examples of the chest-thumping stupidity that I'm talking about here. Lawrence O'Donnell tweeting out, big multimillionaire MSNBC anchor, supposed to be a smart guy. I don't know why people think that he knows anything about anything in foreign policy, but this is what they're saying. Trump wagged the dog. Now the dog is wagging Trump. That was last night, folks. 8:24 p.m. That was right when we're finding out about, did we just lose 10, 20, 50 U.S. soldiers in strikes? And we didn't know at the time. How big were those missiles? What were those missiles? Now we have early warning. These bases are hardened. They were expecting some kind of a response. Trump wagged the dog. Now the dog is wagging Trump. You look at the way that the journos have been responding to this. You look at the way that they are talking about this issue continuously. And it's quite clear that we could ask for, we could reasonably ask the question, whose side are they on here? And this goes a bit deeper. This really shouldn't just be a rhetorical question anymore, because I think that they'd be willing to have America get hurt if Trump's presidency got hurt too.
He trained terrorist armies, including Hezbollah, launching terrorist strikes against civilian targets. He fueled bloody civil wars all across the region. He viciously wounded and murdered thousands of U.S. troops, including the planting of roadside bombs that maim and dismember their victims. Soleimani directed the recent attacks on U.S. personnel in Iraq that badly wounded 4 service members and killed 1 American, and he orchestrated the violent assault on the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad. In recent days, he was planning new attacks on American targets, but we stopped him. Soleimani's hands were drenched in both American and Iranian blood. He should have been terminated long ago. By removing Soleimani, we have sent a powerful message to terrorists. If you value your own life, you will not threaten the lives of our people.
If there's a Trump doctrine, that's it. If you value your own life, you will not threaten the lives of our people. Very straightforward statement. No, this isn't something that you would hear in the faculty lounge at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies or Columbia University School of International and Public Affairs, SIPA, SICE, Georgetown Security Studies Program, one of the most advanced in the country, MIT Security Studies Program, all these different IR schools. You won't hear professors, you won't hear the former administration officials from, different presidencies who get cushy teaching positions at these places saying that that's what the Trump doctrine is. But I'm here to tell you that is what the Trump doctrine is. It's very straightforward. Because you see, Trump doesn't bring to these issues all the baggage, all the difficulties with seeing what is so clear and obvious to the rest of us, that people who have either been conditioned to blame America first or conditioned to think that there is some inherent virtue in seeing everything through the eyes of our enemies first. Meaning seeing their side of it, like, well, why have they become so upset at us? Maybe we did something wrong. It's really, I guess, an extension of blame America first. Trump says if you value the lives of your people, you will not take our people's lives. What was the red line here? We go back to basics. And this is why so many people who see this president in office and say it does not matter that, he did go to a super fancy school, but who cares, right? But it doesn't matter that he wasn't someone who's been through this system. Normal people faced with what Iran's government is and has done, and what the United States is and has done, understand that we are the good guys, and that government is, in fact, the bad guys, and we should act accordingly. No, the Obama administration was a lot of, well, yeah, but how do we get them to be nicer to us? And let's let diplomacy do this, that, and the other thing. Why? What? And they did this with Cuba, too, by the way. What did Cuba do to change its policies in any meaningful way to get this thawing of relations from the Obama administration? Nothing. Cuba, which has just, after inflicting communist, collectivist, socialist misery on its own people, turning what should be a beautiful and prosperous island that all of us can't wait to go and visit and hang out in because it's wonderful. And, Cuba does have great music, food, people, and everything. No. Cuba's a miserable hellhole for most people. And, of course, not those tied to the regime, but most people who live there because of the people in charge. And they've been exporting that misery throughout Latin America. Yeah, we've ruined this country. Let's find ways to help you ruin your country with communism. Healthcare for all, though, right? That's you start to look. Yeah, Bernie Sanders, he could be the mayor of Havana tomorrow. Bring this back to where Trump is and where the journos are and what they've been saying about this. Here's Richard Engel, who's a fellow, very celebrated on the left, a very serious international affairs journalist. All these people. Please, we've had. I don't even know the number offhand, but I know we've had over. I think it's over 2 million people cycle through the wars of our soldiers, our airmen, seamen, military, everybody, through the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Okay, combatants, people who show up in a war zone, whether they're kicking indoors or they're handling logistics or flying helicopters, whatever they're doing. People who are in a war zone as combatants for this country. We got a few million of them. I really don't need to hear from the war zone correspondent journalists all the time, but it's so what we do is so dangerous. Yeah, there's some danger. I've taken the same degree of danger. I'm walking around all the time. Oh, it's so brave. Who cares? People live in these countries. Journalists go for 2 days. They'll go to the green zone. Oh, I've been to Iraq, sir. Yeah, well, do a 14-month deployment, as we have seen so many in our military do, and actually take incoming and have to return fire, and then you can talk about being so brave, journos. But Richard Engels is NBC correspondent, and this is what he, remember last night there was a little bit, you could just see it on Twitter, a little bit. This is where you have Lawrence O'Donnell, Trump wagged the dog, now the dog is wagging Trump. There's a little bit of ha-ha. We're trying to find out if we have dead Americans. We are waiting to hear whether there are going to be flag-draped coffins and families shattered in our own country as a result of the strike. We don't know. Initial reports. And there are Democrats and journalists who their first impulse is, see, we were right. And they're hoping to be right, which means they're hoping that there are casualties here, folks. How else can you view it? How else can you say it? This didn't have to happen. I saw one of the former Obama flacks putting that out there. Okay, yeah, what exactly happened? An anemic response from Iran. The weakest response that they could really give and still claim to have done anything after we killed, as I've been saying, Qasem Soleimani, the combination of George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, Elvis Presley, and Babe Ruth. Here's NBC, correspondent Richard Engel. It's just, he's there to explain the world to us. I swear to God. Journalists and actors are the worst people in the world. I don't know what else to say. Journalists and actors are the worst. Not everybody, obviously. I love some journalists and some actors. But if you're looking at groups of people by profession, the worst people. Richard Engel. Iran reacted with what was a calibrated response. No U.S. dead, according to Iraqi officials. Iran did it in part to restore Iran's honor after losing its general. Will Trump taunt and humiliate Iran? Won't go over well. Oh, okay. Here you have an NBC News chief foreign correspondent taking a very positive tone toward Iran. Was just trying to restore the honor that it lost as a result of its general being taken out. This guy's a terrorist, bloody-minded loon, and we take him out. The administration has been saying, and I believe them, I take them at their word, that this guy was planning. We just had the attack on the embassy. They didn't bring this out of nowhere. These are planning more attacks on us. And notice how, if you're working at NBC News, you got to say, Iran, great statesmanship from Iran here by firing missiles from their territory into another country's sovereign territory at our bases. Could very well have killed people, by the way, even if that was not the intention. But notice how he goes, will Trump taunt and humiliate Iran? Won't go over well. No, what Trump did this morning is give a very statesman-like speech about the reality of things right now between the United States and Iran, saying that we don't want war, but Iran's behavior, enough is enough. Not going to tolerate it anymore. This shouldn't be so complicated, so hard for the journalists to understand. But you see, there's another level here, and that is there are many who were cheerleaders for Obama's policy in Iran, and now we're saying, hold on a second. You mean we don't have to bend the knee to the mullahs? We don't have to pay them off with cash? We don't have to do all these things in the hopes that the Iranians will like us more? No, there was another way? You don't say. Washington Post put this out. Are you a journalist first or an American first? With conflict looming, an old question about patriotism is raised anew. Unless you're a lib journo, unless you're a leftist journalist, notice that we don't use the term progressive as much anymore. We've gone back to other things. Then you might have a question here. But for any normal American, the answer is, I'm an American first. This country matters more than my theoretical professional obligations. Journalists don't all think so, though. I'll never forget being in Beijing and watching CNN International because it was the only English language channel I could get. And I had no outside internet. I had no, contact with the rest of the world. I will never forget being there and watching CNN International and thinking that if Xi Jinping was directing English language coverage of what was going on in the world for a Chinese audience to make America look bad, he couldn't do better than what CNN was making America under Trump look like. Couldn't have done a better job. It's shameful. It really is. It's a disgrace. It's harmful. It's not just a question of I don't like their ideas. I think that there are consequences for the propaganda that some of these organizations churn out. The dishonesty, not just of their information, but the dishonesty of what their mission is. I find that deeply disturbing. Are you a journalist first or an American first? My friends, one thing I can tell you is those of you who listen to the show, who watch this show, you will never have to ask the question that the Washington Post has posed about what we do here. This country matters more than any show, any ethical obligations to your professional life, right? Your first ethical obligation is to your country. At least when it comes to country versus profession, it should be quite obvious. But for LibJournos, it is not particularly obvious. Oh, yes, they were doing live streaming coverage of Qasem Soleimani, buried in his hometown. They were really trying to turn this into a moment of sea change against Trump. You could tell there was some glee at the prospect of Trump getting drawn into a quagmire or war. Libs, they were enthusiastic about this. They liked this for what it would mean politically. You can't avoid that from seeing the way that they reacted last night. I sat there. I didn't tweet anything during the attack. I wasn't taking shots at people because I want to know, while our people were taking real shots downrange, what happened. First concern, are our people okay? Second concern, what are we going to do in immediate response to this? How big is that response going to be? Very far down the list for anybody who's normal would be, oh, does this make me look right? Does this help my political tribe? The libs were shameful last night in that regard. It was appalling, but not surprising.
Today, I am going to ask NATO to become much more involved in the Middle East process. Over the last 3 years, under my leadership, our economy is stronger than ever before, and America has achieved energy independence. These historic accomplishments change our strategic priorities. These are accomplishments that nobody thought were possible. And options in the Middle East became available. We are now the #1 producer of oil and natural gas anywhere in the world. We are independent, and we do not need Middle East oil. The American military has been completely rebuilt under my administration at a cost of $2.5 trillion. U.S. armed forces are stronger than ever before. Our missiles are big, powerful, accurate, lethal, and fast. Under construction are many hypersonic missiles. The fact that we have this great military and equipment, however, does not mean we have to use it. We do not want to use it. American strength, both military and economic, is the best deterrent.
Just go back and look at Nancy Pelosi's Twitter feed, for example, yesterday, and you'll see that the biggest concern Democrats have is not really about what this means for national security of the United States. It's how does this look for them? What does this mean? How's this going to move the polls? How is this going to affect the prospects of a Democrat victory in 2020? You have so many people that were saying that this is such a bad idea. I like to give credit where it's due. By the way, did I tell you this was a terrible idea? No. What did I say? I said that this was the right move, and that I think the Iranian response wasn't going to be nearly as terrifying as everybody was saying it was. I was right. They were wrong. But it's because I approached this by trying to figure out what's really going to happen. They approach this from what does the LibJournos approach this from this perspective. What does my brainwashed, hysterically anti-Trump audience want to hear in this moment? They will tell them that thing, and then even if it's completely untrue, it does not matter because it served its purpose at the time. Here's Rachel Maddow talking about Trump's decision-making with regard to Iran. Play 18.
Has anybody ever briefed these advisors on Donald Trump?
Yeah.
Because if you offer him a bunch of kind of normal ideas and one cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs idea, there's no reason to believe that cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs will seem at all different or less palatable to him.
Of course.
Yeah, he's just got crazy ideas. Ha, ha, ha. So crazy. Moving the embassy to Jerusalem, crazy. There's going to be a huge uprising. The genocide against the Kurds, all of this. People say, the Kurds were being wiped. Yeah, the Turks and the Kurds have been killing each other for 30 years, you idiots. Yeah, there was like a bad day or two because we moved some troops. It's the Middle East. These things happen. Regrettable, but The claim was that there was going to be a genocide. That means everybody's getting killed. That means wiping out a people in Syria. That's not what happened. The trade war was going to be disastrous. Now they're all saying, oh, no one said it was going to be disastrous. Just said there'd be trade-off. No, people were saying, oh, my gosh, this trade war, such a bad, terrible idea, terrible thing's going to happen. Yeah. Our economy is booming. China's economy is going down the toilet. So who is right, who is wrong about that? I have to wonder at some point, do any of these people who their job and their profession is supposed to be presenting information, and for those that are analysts or pundits, they're supposed to make good assessments. They never step back and say, I was wrong. You just don't ever hear them do it. To be anti-Trump is to never have to admit that he has been so much more effective and so much better as president than the so-called smart folks said.